Coming up on Tech News Weekly, Jason Howell and I take a look back at our best interviews of 2020. Stay tuned. Tech News Weekly is brought to you from TWiT's LastPass Studios. We know you're focused on security, but are your employees? Well, LastPass can ensure that they are by making access and authentication seamless, whether employees are working in the office or remotely. Visit lastpass.com/twit to learn more.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is Tech News Weekly, episode 164, recorded November 19th for Thursday, December 24th, 2020.
Hello and welcome to Tech News Weekly, the show where every week we talk to and about the people making and breaking the tech news. I'm Mikah Sargent.
And I'm Jason Howell. I think I was expecting hello.
Oh, see, that would have been better. Why didn't I do that? We should have consulted.
You were so close.
Perhaps close. It's the eggnog just has me, not thinking all the way through.
You're in a nog coma right now. Yeah, I understand. I appreciate your decorations. You really dressed it up for this best of 2020 episode.
You got to, especially when I keep my holiday decorations underneath my bed. So they're underneath the bed in the master bedroom and all of these containers haunting everyone for the entire year.
Yes. Well, you know what's been haunting you for the entire year, and anybody actually watching the show over my left shoulder is a Christmas picture so I've been celebrating Christmas the entire year, essentially.
Nice.
So
nice.
Yeah, that's all right. I also happen to have a tie that has Santa Claus riding a motorcycle, and it's supposed to sing a song, but maybe I broke it. Oh, there it is.
I was going to say we did it.
Yeah, it kind of hurts actually to listen to the song.
It did seem a little high pitched.
It's still going. I wish I could take it off, but I can't. It's attached to my neck. Anyways, what a year 2020 has been, huh, Mikah? This is did you ever think when you took the job at TWiT that you'd be doing your show out of your home, all of your TWiT duties out of your house?
No, because I thought for sure that, I worked from home for several years. I was a writer and podcaster at Mobile Nations, which is iMore and those publications. And then I did freelance writing for a while and podcasting. And I thought that, part of taking this job would mean that I would get out of that working from home slump that sometimes happens. But alas, nope. It came back to haunt me.
2020 had different plans for you, Mikah. 2020 had different plans for literally everybody.
All of us.
So this is our best of 2020 episode. Of course, we are out for the week. We don't have live shows going on right now. So we like to pull together, and what we've done today is we pulled together some interviews from throughout the year that are indicative of this year in particular, because this has been such a unique year, just to say the least. So we've got a few interviews we think you'll like. We certainly like them. That's why we picked them. Starting with this one, we chatted with Zoe Shiffer from The Verge on episode 127. And I remember when we picked out this interview and we're getting ready for it, it was in the midst, we had already transitioned into our work from home environment. Everybody was on lockdown because of COVID-19. And this was one of those few stories that we came across where we were like, you know what? That's actually like a feel-good story right now, when we all need a feel-good story. So let's check out this clip with The Verge's Zoe Shiffer about weddings in the Zoom era. All right, so the coronavirus does not necessarily afford a whole lot of opportunities for some really positive, good feels stories. But everybody loves a good wedding, right? So why should those people who have planned to tie the knot during this unfortunate time, maybe they had plans scheduled in advance, and suddenly this thing called the coronavirus, sweeps the world, and do you postpone your wedding or do you just go forward? And that's what we're going to talk about here with Zoe Shiffer from The Verge, who wrote all about weddings on Zoom. Welcome, Zoe.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
It's great to get you on today. So I came across your article, and it was one of the few times that I opened an article that had, Corona or COVID in the headline, and I was like, oh, that's cool that people are able to pull this off. So thank you for writing about this, kind of bringing this to everyone's attention. You spoke to a number of people for your article who were taking to Zoom specifically, but I'm sure this is happening on other video conference platforms, to speak their vows to the people that they love. How, in your experience, I know you were kind of tracking a hashtag in Instagram. I'm not sure if that was kind of the entryway into discovering, this world of online weddings, but how common is this right now? Is this kind of increasing, happening more and more, or are people, more likely to cancel their wedding and wait until a better time?
Yeah, I think it's really common now. I mean, almost everyone that had a wedding scheduled for April, May, or June has had to cancel. And a lot of people I started seeing on Twitter were talking about, oh, we're going to do our nuptials on Zoom, which I thought was really cute. And yes, when I searched the hashtag on Instagram, I saw over 100 photos of people who had either attended a Zoom wedding or had one themselves. And so I think it's really gaining steam.
So obviously, when you're running a ceremony like a wedding ceremony online, things can get, I imagine, pretty complicated. You attached a couple of screenshots in your article that kind of show the number of people connecting, and then you've got the people who are officiating. How complex do these things get, and do they ever include the post ceremony stuff? Because the ceremony is one thing, but then it's also getting together and having a drink and eating some food with everybody. Obviously, everybody can't be in the same space, but I could see that also happening in one of these things. Is that happening?
Yeah, I mean, people are pretty limited in what they can do after. One couple, went out to a sushi place that they're trying to support amid coronavirus that's had to close, but is still doing to-go orders. A lot of people just had a nice dinner at home. Nothing's open right now. And so it was really, the ceremony was sweet, and then they got off and they tried to have as much romance as they could. But in terms of the ceremony itself, people kept it pretty simple. They invited a lot more guests than they would have invited to the original wedding, because it was kind of like, come one, come all. We're doing this online. You can join. But the ceremony itself lasted about 15 minutes typically, and it was just them and the officiant on the call.
Nice. That's so cool. Now, okay, so speaking of the officiant, how do you find someone for this? I mean, maybe it's as easy as kind of going the normal route and then just simply asking them, hey, are you willing to do this online? But does that kind of does that pose a problem for these people? Do they already have them lined up and the officiant was like, yeah, sure, I'll do that. I don't care.
Yeah, most people went with the officiant that they'd originally had, and they had to often teach them how to use Zoom because a lot of people hadn't used it before, but it's pretty easy to use, which is why I think a lot of people are choosing this platform. There is one caveat in that the couple we spoke to in Scotland, they actually have a law that the officiant has to be physically in the room with you. So while they had, a very sweet Zoom wedding, they're actually not legally married yet. They have to wait until the post-coronavirus world to make that happen.
Oh, I could almost see a still coronavirus world where the officiant is on the other side of the front door with their own live stream going.
Oh my goodness.
It could probably get pretty complicated, and I wouldn't put it past people to try to do that just to make it legitimate and stay safe, of course. What about emotional connection? Obviously, weddings are pretty emotional, ceremonies, pretty emotional situations. I find it's easier to connect on a human level face to face than it is online, even though, especially here at TWiT, we do this all the time, but I'll still kind of opt for in-person versus over the internet. Were the people that were attending these online weddings, did they find there was a good emotional impact, an easy way for them to connect even remotely on an emotional level to the experience?
Yeah, people were really surprised, and this was actually one of the things that surprised me most. People said, we thought it would be anticlimactic, we thought it would be a letdown, but once the ceremony started, they were completely locked in, and it had all of that emotion of a typical wedding. And I think for attendees, it was really a bright spot in an otherwise really dark few months. It was a chance to connect with a bunch of friends, to see something romantic and joyful. And I think all around, people found it to be a really positive experience.
That is so cool. That is so cool. So the people that you spoke with, they've gone through this experience. They have any I don't know, any insight for others who might think to do this? I would imagine, at least in the beginning, people would have looked at the news and then thought, well, I guess we can't have our wedding then. Now there are examples of people who are pulling this off. Do they have any tips to share for people who might want to go this route?
I think the big one is that everyone I spoke to really was glad that they did this. They felt like we didn't want to wait until this is all over, because who knows when that could actually be. And so I think they would first encourage people to move forward if they really do want to have their day still take place. I think the second thing is that people found it to be very important that they mute all of the guests, because there were a lot of people, particularly some older relatives, who didn't really understand how Zoom worked at the very beginning, and having them kind of pipe up in the middle of the ceremony could be a little bit distracting. So setting those things ahead of time was very helpful.
Yeah, and that is one thing that Zoom does afford to the person who is managing or running the particular cast, is that person has the ability to mute everybody else or to choose who's talking at what point. So it gives a good amount of control to the person who's running the event. So that's a good platform for that. However, there's also a lot of news right now. Zoom Zoom existed prior to coronavirus, of course, but now during the coronavirus, everybody's been, jumping onto Zoom because it's easy to use. And so you hear about Zoom all the time. And now we're hearing, of course, a lot of pushback, a lot of insight into their practices behind the scenes that maybe aren't, keeping data privacy or security top of mind, that sort of stuff. Did that ever come into play or awareness for the people that you spoke with for your article? Like, were they concerned about this sort of stuff?
They were not. This was something I was also surprised about. In our world, in the tech world, everyone is talking about privacy all the time, and particularly now privacy on Zoom, security on Zoom. A lot of the couples I spoke to, this was their first time using Zoom at all. And so they weren't really thinking about the privacy and security. They were thinking about the functionality, how it worked, getting people together, but not, what would happen with my data afterwards.
Yeah, and if the ceremony is only 15 minutes, they're like, we'll just jump in, we'll get married, we'll get hitched, and then we'll get out of there before anything happens. So it's all good. I love the story, and I love that people are doing this. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we're all making do with what we can. We can only do the best that we can do. That's why I'm podcasting in the corner of my master bedroom. That's why people are getting married online in their living room instead of at a chapel and stuff. So I love seeing people be creative like this. And your article put a smile on my face. So I appreciate you writing it. Zoe Shiffer writes for The Verge. So everybody should obviously check out theverge.com, find Zoe there. If people want to follow you online, where can they do so?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter. It's just my name, @Zoe Shiffer.
Right on. Zoe, thanks for taking the time. We appreciate it. Stay healthy.
Thank you so much for having me.
Congratulations to the happy couple.
That's right. Awesome stuff. What you got, Mikah?
Well, this is more feel good, I would say. We were joined by Sophie Lucido Johnson, a teacher who's using YouTube to help teach her class instead of Zoom. So everybody was in on Zoom. I remember so many people were in on Zoom at the time because you heard, oh, we're going to do Zoom this, we're going to do Zoom that, we're going to do. And then there were all of these concerns about its privacy and security, and people talking about how to properly Zoom. And some folks were concerned that you were spending too much time in front of the camera. There was all this stuff, and Sophie Lucido Johnson comes along, sort of throws down the gauntlet and says, yeah, you're okay. You're fine over there with your Zooms, but watch what I can do on YouTube, and made some really fascinating and I think engaging content for her kids that helped them to be able to actually learn in a time when the Zoom meetings were kind of all about making sure that the kids stayed in front of the computer. So this was sort of a superhero moment, I think, where I was just kind of in awe of what she was able to do without using the tool that kind of everybody else was using. So let's take a look. Let's talk about Zoom. No, not Zoom.
No.
We're going to talk about YouTube as a teaching tool. What? Very excited to be joined by Sophie Lucido Johnson, who has written a great article in 10, which is Medium's publication. Thank you for joining us, Sophie.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I was reading through this piece and getting inspired the whole time, sort of and nodding my head along, going, yes, preach, yes, because there's so much in here that I think it's nail, head, right there. The target is there. So let's talk a little bit about sort of what you have written and what this piece is kind of about. You know, everybody out there is on Zoom, or we just got off of a Zoom call, Jason and I. But you had some insights about why YouTube is a good teaching tool for you. So would you like to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. I am a public school teacher, and I teach journalism. So we've talked a lot about tech in my classroom, and I happen to know that a lot of my kids don't have laptops with functional cameras that they can use to participate in a Zoom classroom. And then furthermore, a lot of them are watching siblings or needing to take care of parents. And there's just a lot more going on in their lives than there would be during an ordinary school day. And it's hard for them to access Zoom. So that being sort of the main way that we're teaching is sort of a problem with a lot of populations. I know it's not just my kids. So I thought, what's a way that I can teach a lesson that's short and gets across an idea and could be accessed on a smartphone? And I thought, YouTube is a good way to do that. I know the kids are addicted to it, and it's not so hard to learn how to use it. And so I started doing twice a week these video lessons, and the kids will email me, or they'll comment, or they'll sort of engage with the video. They report that they all watch all of them. And I do think there's this like connectivity that springs up there. And I've been just trying to think of like different ways to reach kids who might not be able to use Zoom or use Google Hangouts or have, class in a more traditional way.
Yeah. One of the things that you talk about that really for me was kind of just such a good point is the privacy angle, or the sort of desire to keep things personal. I can remember, anytime you've ever gone out as a Ute and seen one of your teachers in public, it is a very awkward sort of, there's something very, it just doesn't make sense. And you kind of go, oh man, I think of you in this teaching capacity, and to see you in public is a little bit different. And so there is a little bit of a separation there. And you kind of talk about that a little bit with using YouTube as opposed to Zoom, where it's a back and forth.
Right. A lot of kids don't want you to see inside their bedrooms or their kitchens or their houses. And that's also not our purview or our jobs as teachers to sort of, be in that space that can feel very personal and private and need to be, kept separate. And so I feel pretty respectful of the sort of need for space and privacy that kids have. And we all have that. I would not want my teachers to see inside my room in high school. I would not have wanted that. I had a lot of weird posters up, no interest. So, I feel like, also by giving them, in the videos, I try to keep them light and include stuff from my life. I'm trying to sort of build a different kind of relationship, because this is sort of an unprecedented. How many times have we said unprecedented in the last, 2 months? Just a trillion times. It's a new. We need to figure out ways to connect, and it's scary. Imagine being a kid right now. I think about it every day. Like, they're all kind of experiencing a trauma that's just ongoing and very confusing. And they report feeling scared and confused. So just having something that is consistent and shows care and allows them to not have to give so much. This is not a time to expect a lot from students. It just isn't. It's a time to provide a service to them while we get through this period.
Yeah, I think it's really refreshing to hear you say that, because I totally and completely agree. I'm a parent. We We have 2 daughters. They're more in grade school right now, but over the course of the last couple of weeks, the question that my wife and I keep coming back around to is like, are we doing enough to make sure that they're getting an education that is on par with what they're getting in school? And what I keep answering for at least for myself, which is we're doing the best that we can, and that is good enough. And if they're engaged in whatever way, like it's hard to compare apples to apples in this scenario, but they're also doing as good as they can, considering how challenging everything is. Question I have for you is, in going the route of putting something up on YouTube instead of a Zoom meeting, like it requires a certain level of technical aptitude in order to put these together. Kids, especially kids, are very familiar with what works on YouTube and what they're looking for, and the quick, fast edits and maybe music underneath and everything. All that goes out the window when you're doing a Zoom call. It's just like, hey, how's it going? But with a YouTube video, like there's a lot more of a challenge there from a technical perspective. How do you balance that to be sure that you're providing like the appropriate amount of information for them to work off of and not spend all day editing your video?
I that's really true. However, it's also so much easier now than it ever has been to do cool things with just the video editing software that comes with your computer or even your phone. You can download like video editing software for $5 that's like way more powerful than anything that existed, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, or even 5. It's not so hard to learn. It's pretty user friendly. And I guess I think that, so I personally, I don't have kids of my own. I have colleagues who do, and I wouldn't expect every teacher to be able to kind of spend time doing this, but I do have the time to do it. And it does mean a lot to the kids, and the kids know how long it takes to make a YouTube video. So when they see that I've put in a little bit of extra effort and put some music underneath, that just comes with the software. It's not like I'm writing music or anything, or like doing the fast edits. They notice, and it means something to them. I only know that because they tell me they're communicative. It's just sort of the little things that you do as a teacher anyway to show kids, you matter to me and you're special and I care about you. We can't do those in the classroom right now. So what are the ways that we can do things like that outside the classroom? Like if we have the capacity to give a little more, is it worth it? I mean, I would say it absolutely is worth it. It's like a gift that you can give. And also, God bless you for teaching your kid at home. It looks really hard, and you're doing a good enough job. We do not know how this is all going to pan out. I mean, it's just a whole generation of kids who are going to have one, semester that they didn't go to school. And that's a really weird new challenge, and I'm not sure how we'll rise to it. But in the meantime, I think taking care of yourself is the most important thing. And if you as a teacher can give, I think another way to do it might be with like a tiny letter or sort of like a newsletter, or I also draw coloring sheets for my kids and they're in high school, so they really like coloring sheets. They're like, the novelty is back, anything like that. Just sort of like any way that you can figure out how to show the kids that you're thinking about them, I think is worth doing right now.
Yeah, you spoke about engagement, sort of seeing those comments on your YouTube video and being able to respond to those and know that the students are tuning in. How does that compare to what other teachers are doing that's not within, this YouTube use that's with Zoom, or you mentioned Google Classroom, I think?
Yeah. So I live with another teacher who works at the same school as I do. And it's just been, she's also very well liked. She wins a lot of teaching awards. I might say she's one of the best liked teachers in the whole school. The engagement in my, amongst my kids is just much higher than any engagement I've seen with any other teacher has had, because it is, I think there's this monotony that happens. You have, 6 teachers. They're all telling you to come to a Google Hangout. You're sitting in front of your computer. It all kind of looks the same. You're kind of being asked to do a bunch of sort of like nebulous, like not super useful, busy work seeming activities. They're on the lookout for something that is different and to like engage in a different way. So on my first video, I had every kid comment. I didn't ask them to, it just happened. And that was awesome. I remember like that night looking at the comments and just getting all teary. I felt so grateful to hear from them because I'm worried about them. I want to know how they're doing. Feels like I'm tricking them a little bit into, letting me know that they're okay. But yeah, now we're really engaging more via email and Google Classroom because, this is like a new time. My boss asked me to please email all their parents and let them know I was communicating this way. That's really important for parents to know, that your teacher's on YouTube and it's okay for the kid to be like watching YouTube or to be communicating like that. But we also know that it's, safer for the kids to engage in sort of a more like closed system. So that's what we're encouraging right now. But at the same time, any way that I can know that they're okay is, I want it. I want to know they're okay.
That's awesome. That's awesome. One last question I guess I'd have for you is, so then personally, outside of YouTube teaching, you having to do a lot of Zoom calls?
Yeah, man. Like so many. It's just like, and it feels constant. And I feel like I'm going crazy. I feel like, don't you feel like you're going a little bit crazy? It's just like so much of it. And there's always one person who like really doesn't understand how to use it and has the echo and, they don't realize it's them and you don't know how to be tactful. There could be a whole other article about like the, new etiquette of Zoom meetings and how to navigate. I'm sure there's 20 of those articles already. It's all we're talking about. So yeah, anything to get outside of that space, anything, get me out.
Please. Yeah. The first 5 minutes of everybody learning they need to mute their mic. And then the last 5 minutes of everybody saying goodbye, 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 goodbye. No, you hang up. No, you hang up. Anything to get outside of that.
Yeah, for real. Definitely.
Well, Sophie Lucido Johnson, thank you so much for being with us here today. Everybody should definitely check out the article over on Medium's 1.0 publication. If folks would like to follow you online, you have a Twitter account, anything like that? Where should folks check out your work?
Started Instagram. I'm at Sophie Lucido Johnson on Instagram and Sophie Lucido Jo on Twitter.
Awesome. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
I think what I love, especially now, like looking back in retrospect, like we've gone almost this full year in this household with my two young daughters doing Zoom classes, is the creativity that Sophie shows in kind of how she's reaching students. It's been a really important aspect of this kind of schooling from home over Zoom. Teachers have had to become really creative in how they do that. And Sophie really kind of demonstrated that perfectly.
Yep.
So very cool stuff. All right, this next one, we're shifting gears a little bit. This was like an interesting year for a lot of different reasons. And anyone would remember that during this summer, especially during this summer, we had the events with George Floyd and a number of protests going on all around the country and around the world, all about civil rights, all about, people finally going out into the streets and making their voices heard in a moment of just intense frustration and pain. And we invited Nathan Sheard from the EFF, the Electronic Frontier Foundation. And if you follow the show for any length of time, you realize we have the EFF folks on from time to time. And I've always really appreciated their perspective and kind of their mission in the world of technology. And Nathan joined us to talk about how people can implement some kind of guidelines in order to protect themselves when they are going out into the street and participating in these protests and making their voices heard. A really important interview. Many people are obviously they're taking to the streets. They're making their voices heard right now. It's important to be sure that they can do this safely. both from a physical perspective as well as a digital perspective. It used to be that you could actually protest quite easily anonymously, for the most part, at least by comparison. Today, we all carry around a computer in our pocket, and that increases the complexity of this situation. That phone is broadcasting who we are, where we're going, where we came from, to anyone who happens to know how to pick up that information. And you want to protect yourself as far as that's concerned. So Nathan Sheard is lead organizer for the Electronic Frontier Foundation. And Nathan is joining us today to talk about how you can protect yourself in these demonstrations, and really appreciate your time. We love the work that the EFF is doing. Welcome to the show, Nathan.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Awesome. So good to get you here. So first of all, explain why it is so important to look at digital self-defense right now and kind of before leaving the house. This isn't something that you do like after the fact. There's a lot of work that needs to be done prior to even leaving to participate. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, first I would say that one of the key missions for Electronic Frontier Foundation is making sure that people have the freedom to assemble and to share their voice with folks without concern about government repression or warrantless surveillance. And so we stand really strongly behind the folks that are out in the streets that are engaging in exactly that activity. But we keep in mind also that one of the things that they're out there to call attention to are failures and disparities in the justice system. So it's important to make sure that we're also providing resources that meet that need and identify that sometimes we need real protections where legal protections are not sufficient. And so that's why having things like the surveillance self-defense guide that give people information on how things that they can do, and like you said, important things like think about before you even leave your home and like while you're there, and things to do in afterwards to protect and identify that the choices that you're making are privacy is a team sport. So the choices that you're making are not only about how you protect your own privacy and your own security, but also all the other folks that you're out there and standing in solidarity with.
Yeah, indeed. It's a great walkthrough, a whole lot of points highlighted in there, which we're going to talk about a few of those right now, but definitely people should check this out, EFF.org, and read it for yourself, especially if you plan on participating or you have been. This can be a way to kind of possibly enhance or correct kind of your actions going in so you can protect yourself. How important is, like I see on a lot of these lists, people are mentioning you want to have some sort of a secondary device or a burner device, not using your primary phone. And I can understand why, but explain a little bit how this actually protects someone to use a secondary device instead of their primary one.
Yeah, so frequently we'll go back to this fact is like for every person, it's going to be a different mixture around like balancing cost and convenience and security and privacy. And for some folks, they are going to make the decision that there's the information, the data that's on their normal day-to-day device is of such potential. There's such the threat of it falling into unintended hands, be it law enforcement or otherwise, is so sufficient that it's not safe for them to carry that device with them. And so in that case, a burner phone can be really helpful. And one of the things that we benefit from here in the United States, that's not the case around the world, is that currently federal regulation doesn't require you to show ID or to purchase a prepaid phone or a SIM card, although some state laws do differ there. And so if folks that do make that calculation to like not take their personal everyday device, but to get a prepaid phone or sometimes we call it a burner phone, it's important also to remember though that the location of mobile devices can be determined by cell phone towers, and so if you want to keep your ID, so if you're using that method to also kind of obscure your identity or make it more difficult for folks to identify where you've been on a day of action or during a protest, make sure that they're turning off their device, their location data before they leave their home, and not turning it back on till they return home, or if they're turning it off before they leave their home, and turn it back on at the action to make sure they're turning it off again before they go to any place that can be identified with them. That's going to kind of like reduce that level of anonymity that the burner phone is providing, and never keeping their burner phone and their normal phone in the same place where they might be, where their locations could be correlated and potentially used to identify them in that way as well.
Right. And I've also read kind of the idea of leaving a primary device not only home, but on and home. That way it's registered there, right? And in the ways that you're talking about, location, all this kind of stuff, just as further protection. But again, making sure not to cross those wires is very important. Now, if they do have to, if someone does have to leave their house with their primary device, what are a few of the kind of mandatory, like, all right, you better be doing this at the very least, sort of actions that they should be taking on that device?
Yeah, and to build on the point that you just made about leaving your normal device at home, that's an important point. I'm glad that you brought up, because a lot of times when investigators or agencies are looking to identify what someone's movements, they are also looking for anomalies. And so if you've got your phone on every day normally, and then all of a sudden on this one particular day of action, your phone is all of a sudden off, that is going to raise a red flag. But to move to your question around the things that you can do if you are making the choice to take your normal device with you to an action. One thing that's important to do, and I actually would recommend this even if you weren't going to a particular protest, is making sure that your device is full. You're using full disk encryption, so that the information that's on your data is securely protected. Luckily, iPhones and most of the more recent Androids all do this by default. But making sure that, especially particularly if you have an older phone, that you are going through the steps that you would need to protect your device in that way. Turning off Face ID and fingerprint locking is another really good one. It's super convenient. I use the Face ID on normal days, but certainly when I'm on a day, when I'm somewhere where I might be more likely to engage with law enforcement, so whether that be crossing a border or participating in a protest, even though again it's a First Amendment protected activity, I would recommend turning off your Face ID or your fingerprint unlock. The law is still there's still kind of in flux around the kind of protections that you have and being compelled to open your device using biometric data, where it's much more firmly and kind of really in place and has right now less arguable risks involved with using a passcode that you remember, and especially a passcode that's strong, like an 8 digits or more, to be able to open your device, to make so that way you're making sure that data that you're using, that full disk encryption, and it's securely protected against brute force attacks that might be otherwise susceptible to. And using Signal or some other type of end-to-end encrypted communication device. Format rather, SMS texts, regular text messages that people send are sent in clear text and can be potentially compromised either by the use of cell site simulators or simply because of cooperation, compelled or otherwise, between your service provider and law enforcement and accessing that information. And so using something like Signal, where even if that information is accessed, even if the data is intercepted, it's going to be in a way that's not readable by anyone. And again, thinking about the fact that you may not have things in your communication that you're particularly concerned about, but you're making choices for everyone else that you communicate with. And so taking the proactive step of sharing and also making sure that other folks that you are communicating with are using those types of encrypted communications is important. And luckily also, we're talking about having these passcodes that are 8 digits or more, so that can be really difficult if you're in a space where you see something that you really think it's important to be filming or taping. Having to type that in every time is going to be kind of a deterrent or make it more difficult for you. iPhones and a lot of the newer Androids do allow you to take photos or video without unlocking your device, which is also going to be more safe if your device should be taken from you or should fall. At least all of the other information that is on that device won't be accessible other than the ability to take photos. And so with an iPhone, you can do that by holding on to firmly pressing on the camera icon, or with an Android. Some of the newer ones I know, like double pressing the power button, often will do that. So making sure before you leave the house that you understand that you're familiar with how to do that on your device is going to be pretty critical. And being mindful of, if you're taking photos, being mindful of the people that are in those photos, and not, trying to not. I would suggest not taking photos that show identifiable traits, people's faces or tattoos or unique colored hair or clothing. But there are apps like ObscureCam by the Guardian Project or Image Scrubber that's available both on iOS and Android that can help you after the fact to be able to obscure images and remove metadata that could potentially put folks at risk. And finally, I would also recommend using airplane mode on your phone, and so to prevent, as another way of preventing the location tracking. And so there are some apps that will allow you to use navigation without having network access. And since GPS itself is actually, there is just a receive only system, that is, so if you have an app that uses GPS to help you navigate, provided that you've already downloaded beforehand the maps that would need to be able to be in place to work with that could be helpful. But also keep in mind that even though GPS is receive only, if your phone, so some devices will store location data. So making sure that, you again, having it being fully encrypted and if necessarily erasing that data after the fact, so it's not a potential risk to you or other folks that you care about.
Man, that is a good list. Very thorough. And, folks, like I said, definitely go to EFF.org, search out this kind of run through because there's a lot of information there. And, I'm seeing actually a lot of this being shared today, which is and for the past couple of days, which is great because this is important information. A lot of people might not consider this. It's just like I want to participate. I want to make my voice heard. They're not necessarily thinking about how that computer that's in their pocket could potentially be used against them in this scenario. So I love what you guys are doing. EFF.org is where folks can find all this information and all of the posts that you guys are putting out about a whole number of efforts, including facial recognition, which we didn't really talk about, but there's a lot of movement happening right now in the facial recognition space. And, California almost had something go through yesterday that would have really impacted the ability of companies to lean into facial recognition. We're just realizing how dangerous that can be as this proliferates. So I love the work that you guys are doing. Nathan, if people want to follow you online, obviously they can find your work at EFF.org. If they want to follow you and your words, where can they find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Nash12, NASH12. And again, yeah, absolutely at EFF.org, our face surveillance information at aboutfacenow.org. But yeah, thank you. And protect each other and stay safe and wash your hands.
That's right. Right. Indeed. Thank you so much, Nathan. We will talk to you soon. Appreciate your work. Take care.
I think one of the good things about that interview is that many of the tips that were shared and suggestions that were shared are things that we can do whether we're in the midst of protests or not. It's good security and privacy practices that we should all take into consideration. And I really like that. I think that anybody can get a handy tip from that episode. And of course, that's why we had to include it in the best ofs.
Absolutely agree.
Up next, every episode, I think, of any tech show is at the very least a celebration of technology. It is a chance to yes, we can criticize certain aspects of technology and celebrate certain aspects of technology, but ultimately, it's kind of we just all appreciate it. And one way that we saw technology appreciated kind of from a 1,000-mile high viewpoint was thanks to CNET's 25-year anniversary. Brian Cooley had the awesome job of talking about the way that smartphones have come to be over time and how that may not have happened if the technology that brought different parts of the smartphone together didn't take place. I mean, it was kind of a mind-blowing thing, but also a really fun retrospective dip into older technologies, and some that had me looking up a bunch of different stories afterward, kind of learning more. So it was fun to get to learn about this. You've got to listen to this interview with Brian Cooley. Tech enthusiasts like myself would have you believe that all of the technology that we have today is inevitable, but that's a bit of a misnomer, a mistake, an idea that isn't necessarily true. In fact, the phones that we use today, these smartphones with all of their various applications, they almost didn't happen, which is a bit of a shock, I'm sure. Joining us today to talk about the lack of inevitability of the tech that we have today is CNET's Brian Cooley. Hello, Brian.
Hey, Mikah. Hey, Jason. How you guys doing?
We are doing well. Thank you for being here to talk to us about this. One of the main things that you talk about in this article is device convergence. And that phrase alone takes me back to the keynote presentation of a certain Mr. Jobs who was trying to talk about the iPhone as this device that was an internet browser, an iPod, and a phone that we all kind of thought, oh, is it 3 devices? No, it's one device that does all of these things. But there was a period of time where experts didn't quite think that we would have a device that served as a phone, that served as an internet browser, and that served as a music listening device. So can you talk about sort of where we started and at that point, why people didn't see the smartphone as being a thing that would eventually come to be?
You know, a lot of this, let me read you a couple of quotes from old CNET articles that were fascinating to me as I was reading this. You probably saw them, but for the audience, one CNET writer wrote back in the early 2000s, "Do we really want our phones to do everything?" Another article said, "Convergence devices scare me." And these are smart technology reporters and editors. So it tells us about what the time was like back then. And so many things had been tried, like the Newton, like General Magic's Magic Cap devices from Sony and AT&T, any number of devices, even Blackberries. They were pretty simple. They didn't do a whole lot except messaging for a long time. We tried to converge. They didn't work. Pocket PCs, the early efforts to put a Windows computer in your pocket, pretty much all of those were a disaster until the last wave, that was on the Metro interface. And so we had a lot of, I think, gun shyness about it, saying, we've all tried convergence as different companies and software visionaries, and it just doesn't work. You're looking at a bunch of the ones that failed right there. I mean, no one remembers the Pocket PC, the Magic Cap devices, the Apple Newton, and yet they were so close to the right formula. But something had to click, and it's a good lesson, I think, that we need to keep trying at things, whether it's AR and VR that are coming, whether it's connected health and getting more wearables on us that are like a roving, ICU worth of sensors, whatever it is. We got to keep trying because we're closer than we think a lot of time, even when it seems like, no, it's not going to work.
Yeah, so I do have to take a second because as I was going through this article, looking at the different devices that are mentioned here, I know about Pocket PC, I know about the Apple Newton, but just as a person who's interested in technology, I was surprised that I had never heard of Magic Cap and the Sony Magic Link. Can we talk for a second about that? Because that, more than maybe the other two, seemed like the real beginning of what we would eventually have. I mean, it has the desktop interface. It has this sort of, I want to work with all of these different devices, no matter what they happen to be, and different communication platforms. Do you have just a little tidbit more about the Magic Cap and Magic Link?
Yeah, General Magic's the most interesting story. A number of your TWiT viewers will definitely know it. It's a company. You have to be of a certain age to know about it, though, because it was quite a while ago. We're talking about a late 90s company and mid 90s, really. And it had an amazing roster of interesting, quirky, and nonconformist engineers come together. And they really broke the mold and said, wait a minute, let's just rethink this whole idea of a PC sits on a desk at home or at work, and it does email and web, which even those were new or barely available. And then a phone is a phone. You flip it open, you do calls, you flip it back closed. Let's rethink how we bring that together and not just do a mashup, because that's what some of the early devices did. They tried to make something existing smaller or just bolt a couple of existing things together. And General Magic, with their Magic Cap platform, General Magic was the company, came along and said, let's just rethink it from the ground up. It was very Apple. It was a skunkworks cousin of Apple. That's part of the reason it had so much good iPhone, iOS DNA in it early on. It fell apart for various reasons, although they had partners making devices like Sony. And it didn't work because of a lot of reasons that had to do with not getting it done on time. They tried to do perfect and didn't ship with good instead and keep working toward perfect. They also did not recognize the internet, which was just coming at that moment, mid and late 90s. And they were trying to do things on a private network that AT&T, I think, was very much in favor of, as you can imagine. And wireless data was really hard in those days. It really wasn't data. Everything was a modem that was using phone connectivity, just like the old modems did. So there were some things in their way, but it set the table, as you've noticed, as you looked at it. There's a great movie out there right now that's called, I think just called General Magic, and we have a link to it in the story. It is such an interesting story in how this idea of convergence and refinement needs to be done as we're innovating with new products that maybe we haven't quite got dialed in yet. It's a very good lesson in what to pursue, how to pursue it, and what to leave behind as you try to get to market. Because getting to market and speaking to real people's needs is key. There's a million graves in Silicon Valley that are filled with entrepreneurs' ideas that didn't stick to real people's needs.
So then let's talk about the bridge here. You know, we went from these devices that you mentioned, sort of private network, private modem system, and General Magic didn't quite make the cut, but there had to be some devices and some ideas that served as whether it be the jumping off point or sort of the bridge between those early devices and the true convergence of all of them that became, you know, the iPhone of today. And it seems to be Palm Pilot. Is that what kind of was in between there?
I'm such a huge booster of the Palm Pilot and really the Trio that followed after it. And Handspring and Palm have this twisted kind of an in and out, siblings that came together into one family relationship. It's too complicated to get into. But the Palm Pilot brought this whole idea of a PDA together, a personal digital assistant. So I'd have my calendar, my notes, my to-do list, but it wasn't a connected device at all. The only connection it had was you would dock it at your computer, push one button, and it would sync to your Windows PC. I don't recall if it did Mac or not. And so you had a desktop version of the same stuff you had on your portable. That was a really big deal then. Now we think of that as silly today in terms of being impressive. But then came the Trio. The Trio was such a big bang, and it was a real hit, sold in huge numbers for its era when it arrived. And it was the one that first brought together the idea of a phone, a web browser, email, and some degree of apps, and all of it built around an operating system and an interface that was built for that new idea, not pulling Windows onto a little screen or yanking the Mac OS over to a small screen. So it was I think it's an undersung hero. It's not forgotten, but I think a lot of folks say, oh, it all started with the iPhone. I don't think it's that simple. The Trio had a huge amount to do with getting us teed up for the era, the iPhone, of course, turbocharged.
In reading through your piece and just kind of like seeing how long this arc really was in retrospect, it's truly kind of like, you know, proves the hindsight is 2020 sort of thing. It kind of occurs to me that I feel sometimes like now in this kind of modern technology era, we don't have as much patience as we used to for true convergence or that arc to kind of play out. Do you think that's a fair assessment? Like, I feel like over the course of that long, we had to tread through a lot of mud in order to get something that finally, you know, find the gold at the end of the path. Are we patient enough for that now with like current technologies that could need to develop out? Like AR is one example that you point out, but what do you think?
Augmented reality and connected health seem to be the two places, at least that I think, have the potential to blow up next, to take a convergence ethic and then really find a role in a lot of people's lives. And you can look at both of those, especially AR, and you can see a lot of impatience now. But I also would say AR has been coming for a long time. So I don't know that we're out of patience because our patience was short with AR. We're out of patience because AR has been around for a long time, promising us that it's just about to become widely relevant. And it has not done that yet. We get it, but we're doing a show about tech. We are in the 1% of people who are really tech forward and look at things and dig deeply and say, okay, the potential's there. But you cannot ask people to get their pick and shovel out and go dig around and unearth the potential in a technology. It's got to be sitting on the surface. The device has to be, in essence, plated, chrome plated or gold plated with its promise and its value. You can't make them go dig for it. And so I think that's where AR has to find a way to converge with both the devices it'll be best at, probably phone, probably not glasses for the time being, has to converge with real appetites that we have right now, and has to converge with the kinds of data streams that are available. And then another direction has to converge with coming 5G. Another form of convergence. You pull those four poles together and you start to see where AR can finally break out and say, got it. People will look at it, they'll get the value immediately, and they won't have to twist and contort themselves to get that value. Whenever you ask people to twist and contort and jump through hoops to get the value out of a technology, forget it. You've just made yourself a 5% market share tech.
Yeah. So another area that you talk about in the article, you've got AR, but also health. and health is huge. I mean, we continue to see every single time a big hardware manufacturer or software creator is introducing a new version, a new update, a new device, it adds more and more health features. And something that's very big right now, of course, is the pandemic that we're all dealing with. And with that comes contact tracing. And you mentioned something that I found very interesting. I ended up going and looking at it, and it's the Happen app, which can you talk a little bit about the Happen app and sort of the way that now health could have a convergence breakthrough?
Yeah, so Happen, Happn, is an app that is essentially contact tracing, but not for health. It was designed to connect with people who you may have passed by or, as it says, crossed paths with. It's kind of some Foursquare DNA. Do people still do Foursquare? I don't honestly know. Some Foursquare with some GPS, with some modern COVID contact tracing kind of put together. But what's so interesting about it is it's something that's of value to you personally, whereas today's COVID contact tracing we know is of value to us as a society. We need to opt into it unless you disagree with it. I'm not saying you have to, but it's a social benefit to allow yourself to be traced, whereas something like Happen is a selfish benefit, as are most things that have been a big hit in the connected world. That's just the way it is. If we can serve people's selfish needs, they go all over it. I mean, you think people are using Facebook and social media primarily for news, or using it primarily to feed their own personal interests, maybe to hear what they already thought is true, maybe to find friends that they've lost since high school? It's all kind of very personal satisfaction. I think that's the kind of thing that when you can wrap up a core technology in that candy coating that makes us want to consume it, but there's also a societal benefit we can extract from it, that's where things have to go. I was just talking to one of the lead researchers over at eMarketer this morning. They just did a big report on data privacy in the age of COVID-19. And you know that contact tracing is not going to go away. We've all gotten used to it now. But going forward, brands, technology companies, and others are going to say, let's not let this go. Let's find a way to keep people reporting their contacts, because it is good long-term for health. This is not the last communicable disease respiratorily that we're going to see. We know that. Maybe even waves of this particular one. And we can give them better services as well as create companies around that contact information, something that wasn't terribly readily available before. So you're going to see contact tracing be worked on really hard by companies that want to candy coat it and keep you doing it. That's the big takeaway. We got started with COVID-19 ethic around it, but they're going to try and dip it in chocolate and keep us doing it for a long time.
Dip it in chocolate. I like that. In your article too, you
dip in chocolate, right?
Exactly. You also quote tech industry exec and advisor. Is it Steve Toback? Yeah. Who says that the recipe for convergent success is having intellectual capital, content, and great marketing, that those three things have to come together to result in a success for convergence. And so those are things that you do think could happen for AR and for health, or that maybe are happening right now?
Absolutely. And I want to remember when 08 was that article by where we quoted Steve Toback, where he wrote a column for us. So we're going back, not a huge number of years at this point, early iPhone era, right? The things he points out there, that idea of great marketing, Tony Fadell also echoes that, I think, a little bit in the piece. And when he and I talked, Tony was the guy that did most of the engineering on the iPod, a ton of engineering on iPhone. He founded Nest. And now he's over at Future Shape, which is an advisory and a VC firm. He's a visionary around this kind of stuff, around new converged devices. And all of these people have the same echo that if you're developing it and you don't have the marketing being developed at the same time, you're going to have a hard road to go. And that may sound kind of crass to a lot of people that are pure technologists, really skilled engineers, whatever they may be. They say, let us do our thing and we'll build a beautiful thing. And of course they're going to want it. Look how well it works. Look what breakthroughs it has. But you've got to shape it, they will tell you, as you move along through the lens of how you're going to market it. And that's, that can be one that people will push back on in the technology community, because they see the marketing as something that often waters down great products, that will divert or dilute them. But sometimes a little of that dilution is to try and get a huge market with a product that maybe isn't quite as technically impressive as it could have been. But you got a huge market, which allows you to develop many more versions with a lot of money coming in to get to that best possible product down the road.
All right. Well, Brian Cooley, I want to thank you so much for joining us today and for this excellent article.
Nice talking to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody needs to go check out this piece and all the great links that are a part of it as well. I'm holding down command and clicking on so many of them. I've got so many tabs open from this article. So thank you.
It took a lot of digging to find some of those photos. Some of those products I haven't seen or thought about in about 20 years. Everyone has to go iPack with a backpack. This is my favorite photo in there, and it shows the horsiest possible convergence ever, where you take a portable and a pretty simple PDA, and then you clip a camera onto the back of it. It's, you're killing me, but that's all we could do in those days. So it's a great walk through history, especially if you're under 30. You haven't seen some of these products, and I think it's an interesting look at how relatively recently we seemed to be a long way from the goal line. And then all of a sudden we got there.
Yeah. As one of those under 30s, I was very impressed with some of this stuff. If folks want to follow you online and check out your work, where do they go to do that?
Oh, best thing to do is just go to CNET. My stuff's all through there. There's I've got a profile page on there somewhere with my stuff. My automotive stuff is the easiest to find. That's CooleyOnCars.com, COOLEY oncars.com. That's my whole cars and technology section within CNET's Roadshow, which is our automotive site.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for being here
today.
Thanks,
guys. Have fun.
Thank
Stay
you,
well.
Brian. It's a pleasure. Happy 25 years of CNET.
Thanks, Jason. Glad you were part of it.
Thank you, man. We'll talk to you soon. All right. Yeah, Brian's awesome. I loved working with that guy. Love it. And I love bringing Brian Cooley on in any way, shape, or form. I used to work with him back in CNET, and he's just one of the funnest guys to have on your team. And he always brings just a love of technology and an energy to it. He's the perfect person to speak to this kind of this view of technology over the course of CNET's 25 years, which a lot has changed over the last 25 years. The world of technology, it kind of doesn't look anywhere near the way it was 25 years ago. So I love that we could get Brian on as well. Actually, the last time we got him on TNW, if I remember correctly, it was one of the meat substitutes. I think it was Impossible Meat. So you can go back into the archives of TNW and find his review of, I think it was Impossible Meat 1 or Impossible Meat 2. Really funny stuff. So definitely check that out. Before we close the show, I have to ask you, have you ever had Impossible Meat? It's like on my list of things that I keep meaning to do, and I've never done it.
Oh, you've got to. It's really good.
I know. I really want to. Maybe that's just because I'm hungry right now. It's lunchtime.
Isn't it lunchtime? Goodness. Time for some
it is.
Gingerbread cookies and more eggnog.
Yes, and we've got to actually bake some cookies and put it out for Santa, who comes tonight. So, we've got big plans here. Plan on saying hello to the big guy.
I think you mean hello, ho, ho.
Hello, ho, ho, and goodbye. Tech News Weekly publishes every Thursday at twit.tv/TNW. We do have one more episode this year before we switch into what, fingers crossed, ends up being hopefully a better year than 2021. So look for that next Thursday. And just go to twit.tv/TNW. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss a single episode, no matter when it is.
And of course, you should follow us on social media. We are at Twit on Twitter, at twit.tv on Instagram, at Twit Talk on TikTok, and whatever new social media networks may come in the coming year. You should catch us there too. Of course, if you want to tweet at me or follow me on any social media network, I'm at Mikah Sargent. So that is where you can find me at other times. What about you, Jason?
You can find me at Jason Howell. We keep it easy for y'all. So there you go. Big thanks this year to everyone helping behind the scenes to make this show happen, especially in these interesting times. Burke, of course, at the studio, engineering things. Also, John, Ashley at the studio for pushing buttons and editing and making this show even happen and hit your feeds. Thank you so much for all the work that you do each and every week. We do appreciate you. And we appreciate you for watching and listening. As always, thank you so so much, and we'll see you next time on Tech News Weekly. Merry Christmas, everybody.